So I have a lot of friends who are Habs fans, and like they really believe that this series is going to be very, very close. Like that it could go either way. And like really, I'm not saying no. I'm dead serious. Like I have friends who believe the things about how the Leafs are not built for the playoffs or whatever. That they're going to get Gallagher back or whatever. They
Carey Price
truly,
isn't
truly
even skating right now.
But this is what I'm saying about the rest of the division is that Bourne is your general sentiment, because again you interact I think a little bit more with like hockey Twitter and have a lot of people around the game. Like my feeling is that truly if Toronto doesn't win against Montreal in 5 games, 6 max, that I like if they go to a game 7, I don't know how I'm going to deal with that going into that game and the feelings I'm going to have. It would be a disaster. There's a huge gap. The goal differential for the Leafs, I think Montreal is -7 and Leafs are +42. Yeah. Like they shouldn't be on the same planet.
I think the Leafs have the best goal differential 5-on-5 in the NHL at this point.
Right.
So, because hockey's stupid, I'll throw out the quick caveats of like, Montreal won some postseason games last year, and
sure.
It happens every year, yada yada. And Montreal certainly has the weird type of horses where it could happen. Solid decor can get good goaltending, yada yada, all that stuff. Fine.
Yes, of course it could happen. I'm saying if it does happen, that still makes it a disaster. Like
Total
Columbus
disaster.
Columbus beat Tampa Bay in the playoffs because it can happen, but did Tampa Bay fans look at that and go like, wow, that wasn't a disaster?
Right. Yeah. No, it would be a total disaster. This whole year has been about how this is such a soft division. They should, sashay on through to the, what used to be the conference final, I guess the league semifinal now. But utter disaster. The Leafs have zero excuses. They should be healthy. Just looking at the way things are setting up to head into round 1. So I've talked to a couple people today. My understanding of what's going to happen is Freddie Andersen is going to come back and play for the Toronto Maple Leafs in a regular season game, maybe 2, before the end of the season. That, because of salary cap ramifications, means that they won't be able to bring back Hyman and Nash. So Hyman and Nash will rest until the playoffs. That could mean that maybe Riley Nash goes to the Marlies. He'd be eligible for the same thing that Freddie just was, to get his legs under him a little bit, which I think is a good idea. So I think things shape up for the Leafs to be healthy in round 1 and have all their horses, and that eliminates all the excuses. So, yes, total disaster.
Well, yeah, and then they have a week off before the start of the postseason. You just dropped that bomb on us that you think Anderson's going to play in maybe 50%, if not 100% of these final 2 games to wrap up the season. The Hyman thing's interesting because I guess that means he has to go on LTIR then because he's not there right now.
Yeah, I guess that's the corresponding move they'd have to make. I just think they want Freddie. They have to know what they're dealing with going in. Like right now, I don't think we know who we want to start Game 1. Do you guys have a firm opinion on that? Because I have opinions, but not a firm one that's this guy or the other.
No, it's firm that it's Jack. And I still believe deep down that the Leafs ceiling is higher with Freddie Andersen at his best than Jack Campbell at his best. I just do. I just think that there's also an element of... I'm sorry, but to me it's a little personal just from this standpoint. Freddie Andersen got driven into the ground by the Maple Leafs over his tenure as the Leafs goaltender, and he was mostly really, really good. And recency bias has made this fan base look at him as though he is some kind of a pariah, despite, look at what his save percentages were the last 2 years in the playoffs. Of course, he has let in some bad goals. There's just no question about it. But I can't think of something that's less satisfactory to me than the idea of Freddie Andersen not even being given an opportunity to change his narrative in this city, to be given a chance to really win a playoff series again and go into a series where they're favored. I know they were favored against Columbus, but again, that wasn't playoffs, and it was such a weird time, and he played mostly very, very well. He let in 1 bad goal in that series. I think his save percentage was .930 or something ridiculous like that. And just because Columbus got this tandem goaltender group that played unbelievably well, that people look at it and say, well, he was outplayed. And it's okay, fine, but was he one of the worst 20 players in that series for the Leafs? No, I would actually say that he was one of their best 5. So it just feels so icky to me. It just feels gross that guy would not get a chance in a series where he would be favored. But at this point, Jack Campbell really had a couple of games where he did not look like a starting goaltender, or where he kind of looked a bit shaky. And after that, he settled in and he started to do a lot of the things that we said for Jack Campbell to do, which was stop being so reactionary to the media, have a little bit more composure. He let in a bad goal on Saturday, so it's like, again, it's the bad goalie police that do everything for Freddie, but not really the same way for Jack. But at this point, I think that Jack sort of has to lose the net. Like, he's earned it. He's earned it with spectacular play down the stretch, and that has to mean something more than rolling the dice on a guy who is still, working his way back and has not I know it's a hard standard to say, should Freddie Andersen be posting shutouts in the AHL after months off, but yeah, I'm sorry, but like, he let in, I watched his highlights, and some of the goals that he's let in so far down at the AHL level have not looked great. He finally got a full game under his belt. If he plays phenomenally well in these 2 games to the Leafs, I think it creates more of a discussion. But right now, to me, it's not even a debate. It's just conclusively Jack Campbell.
Yeah, and that for me is why I'm glad he's going to get more games. I needed them to be either in the American League or NHL. I just need them to be. I need to see him play more games, because the case that Freddie would make, you say this season, he kind of lost the net to Campbell or whatever. Like, I think he would make the case that he was hurt. That he was playing injured and he didn't have the pop to push like he wanted to, and we saw that reflected in his play. But I think that would be a frustration for him that Campbell would come in on this comparatively stacked Leafs team in a comparatively soft division, and all of a sudden come in and be the superhero for this team. I'm with you that it wouldn't feel right not to give Freddie a little bit of run. So for me, if he gets in 3 or 4 games, he's been in 2. If he plays 3 or 4 games and he looks pretty good in the next one, you can talk me into Freddie for sure. But it would depend on his performance in those couple of games. And it doesn't mean he gives up 2 goals and they're fluky ones I don't think he should play. Like, in talking to people around the Marlies, it sounds like he is, good spirits and energetic and feels healthy, and like he's kind of ready to rock and roll here and to kind of take things back again. So I'm glad there's a couple of games to make this decision, because it's not an easy one. I understand how good Campbell has been, but I'm with you. I do feel like their ceiling is higher with Freddie. I like that he hasn't played as much, so maybe there's not as much wear on this guy. If he goes in a series and they get through the series with Freddie and Ned, all of a sudden he's got 4 or 5 games under his belt and he's healthier than he's ever been. Man, I would love that for the Leafs, and that to me positions them best for a cup.
It can't be game 1, though. To me, that's Rob Johnson, Doug Flutie stuff. If it's game 1 at this point, because you've seen enough from Jack Campbell that you have to at least give him the shot. And everybody that we've talked to, it's almost like it's not even a decision anymore that Jack Campbell has done enough to earn that job for game 1. And what is also true is that I think even in this opening series against Montreal, and especially if it's short, especially if the Leafs look like they should look against the Montreal Canadiens, and maybe there's a back-to-back between, games 3 and 4 or 4 and 5, that you're going to see him. Like, you're going to see both goalies. That's the truth, but it can't be game 1. I hear what you guys are saying, and there's a lot of validity to it, but it's just...
No, but I'm with you, Ben. I'm with you that it has to be game 1, Jack, and that, if I'm just looking at this...
What would it take from Freddie? What would it take from Freddie?
Nothing.
He plays the next 2 games, and he pitches 2 shutouts?
Who cares? These games are meaningless.
No, hold on, though. I will say that if he plays both of the next 2 games, that would be a little interesting to me, just from the standpoint of I'd be like, so what, Jack Campbell doesn't play for 2 weeks?
Right.
That. So I actually do think that if Freddie Andersen gets the net for both games, that would start to spark a debate where I would go, oh my God, if Freddie Andersen just gets the net in the final game of the season, or if he gets Ottawa or whatever, however they divvy these things up, if he gets both of them, yeah. I would be on high alert if I was Jack Campbell, because I'd be thinking, what, I need 2 weeks. I need a game in 2 weeks. Yeah. That seems kind of fair to me. So that would be tricky. I think that you have to give it to Jack, because when you're looking at all things being equal, as much as the Freddie Andersen potential thing is very much there, and I believe it to be true, Jack Campbell's been better this year. That's it. That's all it comes down to for me is like, hey, who's been better this year? There was a stretch where Freddie, I thought, played really, really well, and people were not giving him his due. But then he played poorly, and he can say it was an injury or whatever. But the overall body of work of the season is that Jack Campbell had a better year than Freddie Andersen, and he has done it more recently. And this team has been preparing for the playoffs and looking like a playoff team in front of Jack Campbell. So at this point, for you to kind of flip-flop it, especially given... This also should probably be in the mix too. I know that he's a good backup and he's a good guy and he's rooting for Freddie and all these things that like guys like Mike Futa say who know him. I gotta have some belief that the psyche of a guy like Jack Campbell would be rattled quite intensely if after all of this he gets taken out for game 1 and they put in Freddie Andersen after like over a month off and some AHL starts and one lifeless game against the Senators. It would just be very weird. Like, I don't think sports are supposed to work that way almost.
Yeah, and then you kick around the idea of losing your job to injury, and that's not supposed to happen either. But I do,
sure.
As of today, we're playing a playoff game tomorrow, and I'm the coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Jack Campbell's the guy. I just think there's room for Freddie to play well in his next game, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, he's played 3 times, he's looked pretty good, he says he's feeling well, he was meant to be the starter. I would have some. So to Ben, to your point, it would be interesting to look at their round 1 schedule and say, when does Freddie get in? Like, we're going to go with Jack, but could we start him in game 3? Maybe even if Jack Campbell plays well in game 1, you just go with Freddie in game 2, and you try to be all these other teams that are trying to move on with goaltending tandems rather than starter situations, which I generally
think the stakes are so high. The stakes are just so high though that, like, if Sheldon Keefe, who I want to talk about on this episode, I want to talk about Keefe today because I actually had a few thoughts about him I wanted to bounce off of you. But if the Leafs won a game and Jack Campbell played well, and then he put Freddie Andersen in net and the Leafs lost, I don't know. I don't think Kyle Dubas fires him if they lose that series because they're boys, and I think they are kind of a tandem deal at this point for the next little while. Like, it would be a hard departure. It would be like Brian Burke firing Ron Wilson, and then it's like, yeah, but you're kind of on your way out now too. Like, hey, this is not. You're not getting a lot of wiggle room here, but you fired your best guy, your best friend. I just think that's like your entire legacy in this city forever. Like, you got to win a Stanley Cup the next season, Sheldon Keefe, or that's what only you're going to be remembered as, is the guy who tinkered with the goaltending situation and put in the guy who was cold. Like, it's just, even if he thinks it's best, it's so risky. And I have to believe that at some baseline level, coaches and GMs care about that stuff.
Well, it's a really unique aspect of being a coach in Toronto is that the noise can be so loud from the media, it can dictate events happening. And say what you will, ask Brian Burke. When he fired Ron Wilson, the fans were chanting, "Fire Wilson." He said he couldn't bring him back to that crowd. It made a difference. So, I think it's an element you have to consider in Toronto is like, how is this going to be perceived if it does and if it doesn't work? But at the end of the day, when you light your fire and smoke your corncob pipe by yourself, that's how I imagine Sheldon Keefe at the end of the night.
He's
you
a
have
hobbit?
You have to feel like you gave your team the best chance to win every night. And if he feels like it's Freddie, you got to do it.
I guess at some point this is going to come up. If Freddie Andersen's healthy, it's going to come up. And I do believe that it's much like Columbus last year, where one bad game can knock you out of the net, or like other teams more recently where, you can. I think there is the scenario where Jack Campbell and the Leafs win is if he lets in a 4-goal night to Montreal and the Leafs win 5-4. I think that there's a chance Freddie Andersen gets the net in the following game, right? Like, there are scenarios, especially given Montreal's goaltending prowess and all this stuff. I just don't think that there's anything that can happen between now and then that gives Freddie Andersen game 1. I think there's a good chance Freddie Andersen ends up being the starting goaltender down the stretch of the playoffs. Game 1 to me is essentially a non-starter given all of the different parameters of this thing. But all I would say to people who are like, oh, but it has to be Jack, and like, I don't want to see Freddie Andersen there. Clearly they're thinking about it because, man, they traded for Riley Nash, who has not played a game with the Leafs, who the Leafs owe nothing to, who they gave up a 7th-round pick for, and who has not skated again in a National Hockey League or a Marlies game for Toronto. And most fans agree that you want to put Riley Nash in at some point because the ceiling is higher with Nash, right? And the stakes are not as high. He's not a goaltender. He's a third-line center. But that's still pretty important. And people act like that's a nothing proposition when it's like, put Riley Nash in. How many people do you know have Nash down in pen essentially right now, right? Most. Would you not say that most? You have it in blood. Yeah, I have. I'm kind of torn on it, actually. But I'm just saying that the logic has to be applied to Freddie Andersen in the same way that it is to Nash, in at least some morsel of a way. Do we lose one?
So the one thing that you know with forwards up front is like there's going to be turnover there. The Leafs feel really good about their depth. I think they feel like they're 15 guys deep. And maybe that's true, maybe it's not. I feel like guys are going to get in, and there is some threat of being pulled out even after the team wins if they don't like how you played. Like, Nash is going to get in. If Campbell goes in and, all right, so he's on a tear, great numbers in the first round, they sweep Montreal, and they head into round 2, and he loses a start or two, you just create these problems of like, okay, well, he's been wonderful. Is he not allowed to lose a game or two? Or are we going to, ride Jack Campbell now, win or lose? It's just, it's you have to make more of a decision with Freddie. I feel like the Nash thing is going to play itself out. Whoever's going to play well is going to play. Everyone's going to get in. This one just feels like a harder choice because it's a choice. It's not going to organically solve itself.
All right, so you're Mr. Plugged In today, Bourne. So you said that, Anderson's going to play one of these games, and the post-game comments after that Marlies shootout loss was kind of interesting, where he said, it'd be sure nice to get into an NHL game. Like, do you think the plan is changing on the fly here because they are realizing that Anderson would really like to be in these games, and that maybe if they had their druthers he wouldn't, and that they would give the Riley Nashes of the world a chance instead of him in these NHL games, and they wouldn't put Hyman on LTIR?
I think probably what's happened here is Freddie is ahead of schedule in terms of where they thought he would be at this point. Like he could probably play, he could play an NHL game tonight if, in terms of health. So I don't know when they thought he would be ready, but he got back early enough and got skating, and I think there is some risk of frustrating him and alienating him because of what they tried to do with the salary cap. So part of me just thinks that there was not exactly a blueprint, but like, let's see where we're at towards the end of the season, see who's healthy and what we need to do. And they're at a point here where Freddie feels like he's ready to go and deserves his chance. So I think this is a matter of not burning that relationship with Freddie.